Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Hosts of Darkness. Tonight, we have a special episode for you all, a compilation of some of the best stories told on this channel, alongside with some news stories from the winter and Christmas time, because it's never a bad time to end the year with a scare. I'm your host, Ivan Pereira, and if you like my content, please like, comment, and subscribe on YouTube. And if you're on Spotify or any other podcasting platforms, please give us a rating and comments because we'd love to hear what you have to say. Okay, guys, let's get on with the stories we have for you tonight. And Happy New Year to you all. And thank you all so much. Enjoy. Most people here are probably aware of the story of Ed Gein. For those that aren't, he was a small-town handyman who confessed to murdering 2 women in addition to stealing numerous bodies from their graves. One of the women he murdered was the owner of a local hardware store, where he shot and unalived her. That building still stands today. My story happened 20 plus years ago. I live in that same town and it was just before Thanksgiving. I had already started decorating my place for Christmas, and I needed to replace some of the lights, so I just made a quick trip to the hardware store for some boxes. I knew the building was rumored to be haunted by the murdered woman, but I never put much stock into it. I was in the back area where they kept the Christmas decorations and was about to grab the lights when I heard someone nearby saying something about antifreeze. I turned my head and saw a woman walking by with a gunshot wound in her head. She then suddenly disappeared. I just stood there in shock for a good minute, and when I finally made my way to the front of the store to pay for the lights, the guy behind the counter took one look at my face and simply said, "You saw her, didn't you?" I'm 18 years old, and this happened when I was 16 years old. You see, my mother was going through a rough economic situation at the time, so she went to work at a restaurant and would return around midnight. I was afraid because I was fearful. Besides, the paranormal is something that has always been present in my life. One night, around 10 o'clock, I was eating my dinner and I looked in the mirror to fix my hair when I saw behind me a very tall man, around 1.9 meters tall. It was in the shape of an angel, with very big wings, everything was black, like a shadow, and he was smiling at me. When I reacted and turned around, he was not there. I went back to eat a little surprised and more than scared. After 2 days at night, at the same time I think, he appeared again. But this time, I was drinking water and when I saw him through the mirror, I started to choke on the water. It was hard to swallow and breathe, and when he disappeared, and I could swallow that water again. I don't know what that thing was. I don't look at the mirror anymore for fear of drowning again, but it's weird. I'm not afraid of him. But now that I remember it, I feel like it's a feeling similar to that. I'm a taxi driver on weekend nights, and I've seen things. The first time I encountered something was when I drove by an old cemetery on Christmas a couple years ago. The first time I encountered something was when I drove by an old cemetery on Christmas a couple years ago. One minute I'm alone in the car, and when I drove by the old cemetery, I noticed a shadow in the rearview mirror. I turned on the lights and saw an old lady sitting in the middle back seat. I knew something was off and decided just to ask where she wanted to go, but got no response. I asked a second time, and still no response. I just turned the free light off and just drove around for a couple minutes. Looked back, and sure enough, she was gone. The second time was a week after the new year when I drove by the same cemetery. An old lady waved at me to stop and climbed into the back seat. I asked her where to, and she said, just to the old part of town. We drove by for a few minutes. It's not really a big town. And when we got to the old part of the town, I looked back and there was no one there. I have a few other stories from coworkers, such as feeling long hair glazing their face mid-drive, seeing a man with no arms or legs suddenly appearing in the back, and even some customers asking who the person was in the back. Have fellow taxi or Uber drivers gone through the same thing? I'm a 26-year-old male. I've always believed in ghosts to a degree, but I also maintain a healthy level of skepticism. Anyways, this freaked me out. So I recently moved in with my older sister cause I'm down on my luck. Our mother died last year, and I'm only saying this because I feel like it makes the most sense to be with her at this moment. So, we had some drinks last night. It was Christmas Eve. And I woke up around 1 a.m. and went to the kitchen for some water because I was dehydrated from drinking. When I was going back to my room, something caught my eye in the living room. I turned to look, and I felt like I could see a person sitting there, like the shape of someone in the dark. I was still buzzed at the time, and my first thought logically was, if someone was there, they wouldn't be chilling on the couch in the dark. So, I decided not to freak myself out, and went back to bed. This morning, my sister and I were talking, and she asked me if I ever felt like that you would see someone in the corner at night. I told her, it's funny you say that, because last night I went to the kitchen for some water, and swore I saw someone on the couch. And she was like, dude, I got up for some water and swore someone was sitting there too. Or something to that effect. Seriously, gives me shivers. Let me preface this by saying I'm not claiming this was any particular phenomenon. I'm telling you what happened exactly as it happened. No exaggeration or lying of any kind. On to what happened. 20 years ago, my older brother and I, 19 and 15 at the time, were working a landscaping job in northern Arizona. We had gotten off work at the site around 7 p.m., hopped into his truck, and started the 45-minute commute home. On the way back, there's a dirt road that leads about 20 miles into the middle of the desert. It's there mainly to take dirt bikes out and go four-wheeling, etc. But we would use it as a good spot to stop and smoke weed while avoiding prying eyes. So we drive a few miles in and park in between two hills that hide the truck and us pretty well. We've done this about 30 times up to that point, though never again after that night. We stopped and I commenced the ritual of breaking it up to roll. He was talking about something, but I wasn't really listening until I heard his voice change. Did you hear that? He asked. We both listened and heard a strange, high-pitched, tinny sound for a few seconds, and then, suddenly, complete silence. The desert's actually a pretty loud place at night. I remember realizing that when the sound was gone. As we sit there for maybe 5 more seconds, my brother gasps, starts the truck and floors it in rapid succession. We're flying out of the desert now, and I'm bouncing like a ball from all his reckless driving. I'm asking him, what the fuck, man? As we go, but he says nothing. We hit the street, and the lights of a passing car showed his face. He was pale and completely wide-eyed, with his mouth open. I got scared at just seeing so much and just sat there waiting for him to stop. We finally stopped at a McDonald's parking lot when we got back in town. He started crying.
I just patted him on the shoulder and waited. After a few minutes, he asked me if I remembered. Remember what, man? We were in the desert for like 5 minutes before you went flying out like a crazy asshole. He looked at me and started sobbing. He said it had me, and he couldn't do anything. He said it took me. At this point, I started putting some pieces together. It was quiet out, no cars. Looked at one of the billboard clocks and saw it was 11:11 p.m. My brother told me something had grabbed me through my closed passenger window. He had gone for his pistol and then he suddenly froze and couldn't move because the thing told him that if he didn't stay right there where he was and wait, that I would die and that he would be next. He said he felt it in his heart to be true. The only thing that the thing that had me was very tall and thin with huge black eyes. He said he didn't remember anything else about it, just tall and thin with huge black eyes. He sat frozen in absolute terror for hours while the thing disappeared with me in the desert. Then suddenly, I appeared in the truck and he just gunned it out of there. Over the years, I've talked to him about it twice. He hates to even mention it. He's ashamed, I think, and still very much afraid of it. He changed after this, always seeming to be less energetic and a little withdrawn. I wish it wasn't like that. I wish I could help. I told him he's blameless and I thanked him for getting us out of there. That's all I could do. I had considered multiple times to get hypnotized to see if I could recover some memories, like I heard from other people apparently have. But whenever I think about it, I remember the light flashing over his face and the sheer terror I saw. Better not to know, I think. Anyway, this is sort of fuck you to whatever it was. I told the story. Eat me, okay?
I have a friend who was a trail ranger, basically a ranger who couldn't get you in trouble. He told me about his time he was gathering illegally placed wildlife cameras and knocking down hunting stands, feeders, and blinds with another actual ranger. The other ranger wasn't feeling so well, so he said he was going to go head back as it's an hour ATV ride. Friend finished up the last one when he heard voices. Keep in mind, he's far off the beaten path. He called out and no one replied. As it gets dark, he started to head back and found that his ATV wouldn't start. He then noticed that the battery was not connected anymore. He reconnected it and started to drive, but it wasn't going fast at all. Less than a half an hour later, the whole thing died. He radioed back basically saying, "Hey guys, I need someone to come pick me up." They told him that they would be there in about an hour. He asked if the other guy got back, and they said no. He settled down and started a small fire, but before long, he heard voices again. It's dark. He's not happy. The voices sound like an argument now. Someone was angry and yelling at someone who sounded more scared. He called out and asked if anyone needed help. The voices didn't really seem to care. He guessed that they had to be around. He guessed they had to be less than 1,000 feet away. He radioed again and they said that they were having trouble finding the path he might have been on and hadn't left yet. He asked them just to get to the other ranger to tell them where they were before because he left with the iPad that had the map on it. They said he still wasn't back. About 3 more minutes go by and he hears the voices start up again. He decides to walk to them, hoping maybe that they would stop being drunk assholes and maybe have a map. He walked in the direction, but the voices seemed to be getting further as he got closer. Finally, after 20 minutes, he gave up and walked back. He got a radio call and they said that the other guy was found passed out, covered in vomit, and was being taken to the hospital, but he crossed off everywhere they found a stand, so they have a general idea where he was. Then the radio died and the voices came back. Bored out of his mind, he decided to listen to what they were arguing about, picking up things like, "Well, you knew it wasn't yours to take. I don't fucking care. You know better," and so on. His guess was two hunters arguing over a kill. Then he heard one shout something unintelligible and silence. Then a gunshot. He doused in fire and hid. After that, he heard nothing. just his breathing for the next half an hour until he saw ATV lights. He told the guy picking him up everything, and they called back. They had people looking for 3 hours and found nothing. They came back the next day with police and dogs. After about an hour, a shallow grave was found, and in it was a long dead man who had been clearly shot in the face. Thing was, it was a skeleton who had been there for years. So, either the argument he had heard just ended with a bang and two parties went home last night, or he heard the murder of someone from years ago. Not a ranger, but when we were about 14, my friends and I went up to stay at our buddy's family farm in rural New Hampshire. Not much there besides farmland and miles of deep woods. It was around midnight and we just spent a few hours fucking around, smoking cigars, and building a bonfire in one of the cow pastures. To get back to the house from the pasture, you needed to walk about half a mile through the woods and across another field. And the kid's dad had a tradition of messing with us on our way back. The usual routine was waiting on the porch and shooting Roman candles at us as we crossed the field. We started walking back, and as we emerged from the path, we started hearing loud rustling noises in the tree along the edge of the field, about 70 yards away. We all ran into the middle of the field and hit the deck smiling, thinking my buddy's dad was about to shoot fireworks at us. About 5 minutes of the intermittent leaf rustling and no Roman candles, our smiles were gone. We started debating if it was a black bear or some other big animal. The rustling was distinctly the sound of footsteps. It would pick up and suddenly stop as if someone was running tree to tree. Thoroughly freaked out, my buddy pulls out his cell phone and calls the landline at his house. He stands up and walks a little in the direction of the house while my other friend and I stay laying down, staring in the direction of the noises. Suddenly, something runs out of the tree line. I will never forget this image as long as I live. We were about 50 yards away, and we were only 50 yards away, and there was only a crescent moon out, so there wasn't much light to make out fine details. But we watched as this inhumanely tall thing strode across a portion of the field and then back into the trees. It was skinny with disproportionately long limbs, and in the dark appeared to be a solid light gray/white color. As it ran, its incredibly long arms and legs swung in this disturbingly unusual way, and it appeared to be moving much faster than it should have been. As fast as it appeared, it had gone back into the forest. My friend and I looked at each other in silent horror. We stood up, ready to book it back to the house. My other friend walks back over to us, oblivious to what we just saw. His dad picked up and he said he'd been in bed for an hour. Without saying anything, me and my friend who witnessed it started sprinting for our lives back to the house. The other friend followed suit. We made it back, locked all the doors, and recount what we saw to the other friend and his dad. None of us slept that night. When we went downstairs in the morning, my friend's dad, whose bedroom is on the ground floor, tells us how throughout the night he heard something banging on the side of the house and windows, and claimed he went out several times with his shotgun to find nothing. We thought he was just fucking with us at the time, but to this day he stands by that story. As someone who doesn't believe in the paranormal, it's not a story I tell often, but the two friends who were there and I still talk about it regularly, and it scares the shit out of us every time. Just this year, I shared about it with another buddy of mine who loved that type of stuff, and after a quick Google search, he shows me this link along with a few others. Scrolls down to Wood Devil. Little side note, the link will be in the description. When I saw it, I nearly shit my pants. Description and depiction of this creature from local folklore matched what I saw perfectly. I honestly don't know what to believe, but I know what I saw, and it's safe to say you're never going to catch me in the New Hampshire woods past sunset again. Bonus creepiness: the stretch of forest adjacent to his family's farm has been known locally as Bones Wood or Devil's Wood for as long as his family has lived in the area, which is several generations. When I was in elementary school, there was a classmate whose name was, we'll say Pedro. I will not say his name for the safety of his family. Pedro was with me from first grade to third grade when he died after being sick for almost 4 months. He was an overweight boy, and many children made fun of his physique. He was not my friend, but I Felt a little empathy for him since I didn't have many friends either. I was never very popular nor very social. Near the end of second grade, he was telling me that his neighbor was a witch and that he was very afraid of her, afraid that she would do something to him or his family. In the end, it turned out she was indeed a witch and disappeared as such. When he started the third year of elementary school, I saw that when he started the third year of elementary school, I saw that Pedro had lost a little weight. Well, there was 2 months of vacation and many children go on vacation, but some stay to work to help their parents, either with housework or some job to generate some income and help economically. But this was the case of Pedro. Some children commented that his parents were bullies for putting him to work so young. He's just a child, they would say. On one occasion, he approached me. It was a little before the Mexican Independence Day parade and told me that no, his neighbor was not a witch at all, that they were now friends, and that in fact he was working with her to help his parents with the household expenses. She's even helped me with my weight, said Pedro as he touched his belly with both hands, tapping it gently as if it were a drum. The Independence Parade passed, then the dances for the revolution, and now Pedro looked thinner. Even two girls, Yolanda y Claudia, the most popular of the third years, fought because they wanted to be Pedro's companion in the traditional dance. On that occasion, they had chosen La Segunda de Rosales to dance. By the time of December and his posadas arrived, Pedro's physique was more than thin. Now that he looked more tired, always with dark circles under his eyes, it seemed he was working too much, or maybe he had started to become exhausted from the work and it had become a habit. His mother had begun to worry and forbade him to continue working with Elizabeth, the witch of the third grade, as some of the kids in elementary used to call her. But Pedro refused to stop working for her, saying that he had helped them and that since she was preparing his breakfast and dinner, he felt better with his body. I don't want to eat that junk food I always ate with you, Pedro told his mother. Since both parents worked, they had left money for the older brothers to buy gorditas and burritos for breakfast or pizza and hamburgers for dinner. Now that I'm eating well, I feel better, and with the vitamins that Lisa gives me, now I feel more energetic. And he was right, as his brothers continued to have weight problems. Pedro went from becoming a comelonches, or an overeater, to a carita, a handsome person, in less than 3 months. But now, by December, his haggard appearance had stripped him of that carita title for the Love and Friendship Day gift exchange. The girls in the group didn't know how to leave him out, as he now looked cadaverous. It's amazing how cruel children of that age can be, but there was no need to leave him out, as in early February he stopped attending classes, as he did not have the strength to get out of bed. I didn't see him, but the teacher of our class went to visit him, and one time during recess I heard her commenting to the teacher of the other third grade classes how he looked. He looks like a skeleton, my teacher said. Maybe he's drugged with some solvent, because he looks really bad. His skin is gray and his eyes are yellow, his hair is ashy. I think I had nightmares on some occasions, just imagining the appearance of the one who I'd once known as my friend Pedro. His family didn't have the resources to put him in a hospital, as he spent his last days at home. Some of us children, full of morbid curiosity, would pass by Pedro's house on our bicycles just because the older children told us that we could hear the poor boy's screams of pain. We pretended that one of us had dropped our bicycle chains or needed a repair right in front of the house to see if we could hear his voice, his screams. But later we find out that it was a lie, because Pedro didn't have the strength to utter a word. We were there in front of his house when I saw her, the witch, Elizabeth, the witch of the third. She was going up the outside stairs to go up to her apartment. She was carrying some cans in her hands, and I looked at her, and she looked at me, and I felt something. A cold afternoon in March 1998. At my 8 years of age, I didn't know much about body language. Now I am a psychotherapist, and I could interpret more. But in her gaze, there was no expression. The witch woman, she felt nothing. The child she had almost adopted was dying 2 houses next door and one across the street, like a knight's move in chess. Pedro was dying and she didn't care. She was never known to support his parents. This I found out later, nor did she visit him. Nothing. By the time the 3rd year was coming to an end, Pedro's parents came to talk to the school principal. They were asking for help because Pedro had died the night before in his sleep. That night, the witch disappeared, as any witch would do. The autopsy of the child revealed that for some time he had been poisoned, but as his parents never took him to a doctor, perhaps for fear of the questions they would ask, or maybe because they didn't have the economic resources to do so, they never knew. The witch left her house and was never heard from again. Although she was not a witch, as we know in movies or stories, the children in my neighborhood will always be afraid of the witch who murdered an innocent child. I have a story that didn't happen to me, but to my brother and cousin. It turns out that we went on a vacation with my grandparents to a hidden village in Oaxaca. I must say that it was a very lovely experience and I would like to repeat it again. Well, the point is that to get to my grandparents' house, you had to go through a dirt road that almost no one traveled. My grandparents' house was about 50 meters from the edge of a hill at the end of the road. This happened on January 1st at dawn, when the celebration was over and only my uncles, parents, and grandparents were left talking. It is worth mentioning that my grandparents had 2 houses, one where they lived and where the kitchen was, and the other was where there was only 2 rooms for visitors. Well, our room had a wooden door that led to the end of the road, and it was only tied by a shoelace. My brother, my cousin, and I were playing at our room about 2 a.m. Since there was no internet or phone signal, we decided to play a board game. Suddenly, I felt like drinking water, so I got up and headed to the other house where everyone was gathered, but not before making a joke to my cousins and my brother, telling him, "Don't let him go out, Momo." I didn't want to go through the wooden door in front of my room because I was too lazy to open it, but I went out the other door. But when I went through the wooden door of the room, I noticed a strange vibration, like when a predator sees a prey. I got scared because I thought it was a wild animal, and I quickly entered the house. I grabbed a glass, and I quickly entered the house. I grabbed the glass and went to pour myself some water, but just as I was about to go out to the laundry room where they had the drinking water, my cousins and brother were running in. When I asked them what happened, my cousin told me something that has left me thinking until today. He told me that shortly after I left, someone or something knocked on the door in front of the room, but the difference was that it was knocking desperately, as if it had been chased by something. My brother thought it was me, so he said, "I know it's you, don't scare us." But at that, my mom's voice was heard asking me, "Where's your brother?" In the other house. They both tell me that after they had heard my mom's and my brother's conversation, the thing that was outside peeked through a crack in the wooden door. I don't even want to imagine how scared they were when they saw a red eye looking at them. From what my brothers tell me to this day, but it wasn't a common eye, but one like a dragon. Scared, my brother and my cousin ran out, entered through the door and where the laundry room was. Upon hearing that, my body bristled, as moments before I felt a strange presence heading to that wooden door. After hearing that, my grandfather got up from where he was and ran to the edge of the hill, pronouncing some words in Nahuatl, almost shouting them. When he returned, he advised us to go to sleep and not go out at all at night. And if we did go out, we should be accompanied by an adult. We obeyed and went to sleep. The next morning, we all got up for breakfast, and he told us that many years ago, during the time of the Spaniards, several local Indians were shot and thrown into that ravine. The Indians didn't have justice and became spirits that wandered around looking for a soul with Spanish blood to take revenge on, usually taking the souls of children. That is why my grandfather ran out to that side of the house to pronounce some words that were said. "Leave them alone, they do not belong to you," several times. Hearing this frightened us, but my grandmother told us that we didn't have to be afraid, since my grandfather had scared them away. It was a very strange experience that I lived, but it still leaves me thinking that I was lucky not to be taken by that spirit. I have a witch story from Mexico. It happened to my dad when he was younger. He and some friends decided to go camping, and I forgot where he said it was, but it was somewhere in the mountains outside of Mexico City. They stopped at a small town for supplies and then headed up the mountain. They set up their campsite and started a fire. Then one of the friends took out a bottle of tequila they had swiped from his parents. It was, according to him, to help stay warm in the cold night. As they sat there by the fire, they started to see some strange lights in the other mountains. They were not cars because they were traveling up and down the mountain, and not as if they were following a road or anything. They were too low to the plains. My dad and his friends watched for a while, and then things got scary. Everything got pitch black. Even with the campfire, my dad said you could barely see it in front of you. Then they were gripped by an overwhelming sense of fear, a panic like they had never felt before. One of his friends, he grabbed a couple of sticks and fashioned a crucifix out of them. They all gathered around it praying before finishing off the tequila and passed out. In the morning, they decided to leave for home. They stopped at a small town for breakfast and began to tell the locals what they had seen. One of them told the guys that they had been around witches. You see, witches were known to be in the area. The lights were meant to distract them, and the further away they appeared, the closer the witches were. The fear they all felt was meant to disorient them and make them easy prey. They were told that they were lucky to have made it back alive that night. I have a very fuzzy memory as a very young child, maybe 4 years old or less. I saw a headless man talking to me with his hands in the living room. Only, I remember running to my brother's room. But my family tells me that they found me staring at a corner in the living room. Sometime later, I found out that when they were digging to make the foundation and cistern of the house, they found a kind of family tomb, a corridor with bodies on the sides. The construction is more or less 35 years old on Elegido land, to which what they tell me, the tomb went on to an adjoining lot. The entrance is on my parents' land, and the rest is on another piece of land without construction at that time. So they applied the Mexican "not my problem" and built a wall and made the cistern. The area was a kind of cemetery, since several neighbors found clay idols, carved stones, etc. when digging on their land. According to what they tell me, when it was uninhabited, now there's more people than there are space. It was common to hear noises, voices, and children running in areas where You could barely even walk without tripping, according to what they tell me. At night and early morning, all the neighbors in the region have their own paranormal stories. My grandfather's house has something. Several times I've heard footsteps on the ceiling, someone wiping their feet on the carpet, doors slamming in the night. I remember one night when all my cousins were at my aunt's and my mom's old room. We woke up around 2 or 3 in the morning. We were all wakened by the sound of someone shuffling their feet on the carpet in the room. I remember getting up and seeing one of my cousins looking at the center of the room, and the other 3 were getting up when the shuffling sound changed to heavy footsteps. The door to the room was locked, but the footsteps followed the path to the entrance of the house, and then when we heard it, it whipped open. In the case of my cousins and aunts, they have had more unpleasant experiences. Another story was, my mother was working in my grandfather's office and heard footsteps behind her, where there was a window overlooking the courtyard. She says she started to feel cold, and the computer started to have effects like as if you put a magnet to it. My mom ran out of the office and asked us to check if everything was all right, but we found footprints of someone barefoot in the mud, in the yard, right in front of the window she worked at. The third story is of my cousins. My cousins tell me that they were playing on the computer when they started to feel cold and the desk began to shake violently. They then ran out scared. We didn't find anything, but the desk was too far from where it was originally, and it is too heavy as a piece of furniture for my cousins to move it. One day my grandfather casually told me that when they built the house, they found bones of a short adult with parts of the thorax cut off. He lives in Cholula, Puebla, where the Spanish were supposed to have killed many indigenous Cholutecas. My grandfather says that maybe it was a Choluteca who died during that time, and that he didn't know what the workers did with the bones, but that they didn't report the findings to the government so they wouldn't expropriate the land. My mom is from a town in Zacatecas, Mexico, where there was a lot of belief in popular customs and Mexican legends. My grandmother always told us all kinds of stories, but one that really stuck with us was that one day they went camping to a place near a ranch where they lived. There was a kind of lake, and they camped near it. At night, they began to tell horror stories as the night fell. Suddenly, around 2 a.m., someone was going to their tent to sleep, but then they began to hear howls of coyotes, and that made them alert. She tells us that they turned towards the trees, and they began to see shadows moving from one tree to another. She tells us that she couldn't make visual contact with them, but one of her brothers took a rifle and began to shoot at them, when suddenly he seemed to have hit the shot and something fell from the tree. They ran towards it, and when they arrived, they realized it was a woman with a very wrinkled face and a completely inhuman expression. Her eyes were sunken in, and she was making these very strange noises. They were paralyzed. And suddenly, without realizing it, another shadow came down to help the woman. They stood up and moved through the trees. They tried not to lose the trail, but when they could no longer see them because they encountered a clearing with no trees, they could see in the distance how some fireballs were moving away at full speed. Definitely a pretty good story, and one that I can't imagine what would have happened if I were there. When I was a newborn, my parents slept with my grandmother in a small town in Toluca. My mother said she felt very cold, so she opened the door. Later, she wanted to get up to close it, but she could not move even though she was conscious. While she shouted to my dad, who apparently didn't hear anything, and neither my grandmother nor another aunt in the same household. She felt that someone was pulling me out of the bed, although she didn't really see anyone. Then, due to fate or I don't know what, I started crying, and at that time, The witch, the bruja, let me go, and I heard the knock on the door. My mom says that they had already been told that there were witches there, so they had done a series of things they recommended to prevent the witch from taking me. Maybe that saved me, who knows? The next day, my mom told my dad about what happened, and he replied that maybe I was dreaming. Then my dad asked my grandmother why she had turkeys on the roof, because that didn't let them sleep at night, since the roof was made out of tin, and my grandmother replied that she didn't have any turkeys. My dad didn't believe her and went upstairs with a ladder to prove that my grandmother was lying. Well, he didn't find any turkeys, but he did find some bloody turkey footprints. Here's my story. When I was young, I was 17 years old. We went to a town of San Pedro Guerrero in Mexico. We went for my younger brother's birthday. My brother and my mom went as well, because in that town there was my mother's family. The point is that we were going to go stay there for 5 days, but on the third day at night, my brother and my cousins were already asleep in their room, but my mom was in a room talking to a friend. It was already early in the morning. One of my cousins and my brothers were asleep. It was early in the morning. One of my cousins and my brother was already asleep, except for me and my other cousin. Don't ask what we were doing. Suddenly my mom screamed loudly. My uncle and my aunt got up quickly, and we went to go see what happened. But my uncle with his shotgun gave us each a machete, and we went to go chase something to a river. At the end, my uncle shot something. We were going to go see what it was, but my uncle with an angry voice told us not to go. When we returned, my mother was pale and trembling. She tells us that she saw a big dog and that it looked like it had a mange, but it had hands and a face like a human. From then on, my uncle didn't let my cousin who was asleep and I sleep that night because we were the men in the household. The next day, the neighbors said that a man was killed right in the same place that my uncle had killed that dog. A few months later, they told my mother that she had seen a nahual. More of the story? Oh my Jesus Christ. Get this. This is what they tell me. Moral of the story. Don't eat your cousin during the night. Emergencies could happen. What the fuck did I just read? I remember a paranormal story that happened to me 2 years ago. I was going to travel where the men of my paternal family worked. My grandfather is the owner of a hardware store in La Rioja, in a small town in Mexico. They went to pick me up at my house to take me with them to where they would work, but first they had to pass through some towns. Around early morning, I don't know what time at night, it was during the trip, we went along the road that was dark, with absolute silence, and there was no one passing by. And as I was getting bored, I started to look out the windows and just saw a man and woman hugging each other where there was a small house with a little Virgin Mary statue, as if they were praying to her. They were looking at the statue, and as always, we stopped by to pray to her. The strange thing is that when we got out of the car to pray, I pointed my flashlight at the couple who were hugging, and they had just disappeared out of nowhere. There was no vehicles or anything. I was not the only one who saw them. My father and my uncles also saw them. The road was like the picture right in front of us. We prayed to the Virgin Mary and continued on the road. Along the way, I felt watched, very, very uncomfortable. I looked back to see where the little house was through the window and saw the couple again. I decided to ignore everything I saw. And just that my uncle, not really my uncle, but we call him that out of affection, he's a truck driver and he has told me many, many paranormal and scary stories that have happened to him. I know one story where he told me that he saw a demon or something like that on the highway when he was working. If you want more truck driving stories, let me know. Another story I heard was another day when I arrived where my paternal family worked. There was a hardware store where they worked. In the back, there is a kitchen and 2 bathrooms. There's a hallway upstairs. Down the stairs, through the rooms, you could hear footsteps, strange noises for the last rooms that are at the bottom that no one ever stays at. Always a bad vibe, gives discomfort, as if something or someone is watching you. It was at night, watching TV with my brothers, I saw something through the window, because I felt like I was being watched, and I saw something pass through that open area in the back of the house. I don't know what that was or who that was. I'm afraid to go through there at night. That's all. I don't know if this is technically horror, but there is a legend that is still passed down orally in my ranch. In the cemetery of the municipal seat, there is a shooting grave. There is no sign that there was a tribe in the area, nor are there any graves, and for the same reason, it is not considered historically important because it has been empty for centuries. So you're allowed to go down there to the graves. And there's even a ladder that no one remembers who put there or when, but it's there so you can climb down. If you approach the wall furthest from the entrance, you will notice that there is a small hole, just with enough room for a small child to crawl through. And no matter what you light it with, you cannot see the end. The legend goes that supposedly, the end of that hole is a subterranean cave where there is colonial treasure. But in order to get there, you must crawl constantly and without stopping. Because if you stop or try to go back, no one will know about you, your name, who you are, etc. My father told me that my grandparents directly forbade him to try it. I don't know if it was out of common sense or because they believed in the legend. My grandfather was a slaughterer in the old slaughterhouse in the city of Merida. He always told my dad that when he was walking home at dawn, he could see a hen pass in the middle of the road with a row of chicks behind her. For the Mayan Yucatan people, this is a symbol of bad wind. So my grandfather would either pray while making a cross with his knife, or he would go down another street. Likewise, when my old man was a child, he was told that if he continued to misbehave, La Negra del Parque de San Juan would take him and drown him in the fountain. Basically, it is a fountain with a sculpture of a woman that was brought from Paris in the beginning of the 20th century and installed in one of the oldest neighborhoods in the city. The funny thing is that when my dad told me about it, when I was about 10 years old, every time I would drive by the park at night, I would stare at the fountain half scared, imagining that the statue on the fountain would move. Hello Reddit, this is my first story using this website. I created this account because I wanted to share a couple stories that had been passed down in my family. So, first I'll give some background info. These are told to me by my great-grandmother, currently 90 years old, and my grandmother and her sister. These take place many, many years back when my great-grandmother was a teen and when my grandmother and her sister were very young. These stories take place in rural Mexico. My family lived in a ranch back when there were barely any cities, just a couple of houses, meaning no electricity, communication, roads, or anything like that. So basically in the ranch that my family lived in, they lived right next to a river. And the other house next to the river also lived near this river, since it provided many, many resources. My grandmother told me that these gnomes came from up the river and closer inland, like many other creatures. My grandmother told me that these duendes, these gnomes, or elves, came from up the river and closer inland, like many creatures, which was completely uninhabited for hundreds and hundreds of years, which is why they believe that these creatures are able to live there. These duendes were about the size of a small child, and they were very mischievous, but not evil, In fact, it was known around the village that these duendes loved children and would always play with them. Over the years, this became normal, and for some reason that people just accepted that they were living and seeing tiny people all the time. Different times, I guess. My great-grandmother told me that she played with them, and when she was a child, when she grew up and had my grandmother and her sisters, the duendes were still around. These duendes would enter houses at night to play with children, and one time they entered at night and gave gifts to my grandmother that was in her crib because she was just recently born. When my great-grandmother woke up and saw the crib, there were multiple stones from the river surrounding the crib. Also some piles of dirt and some things from the river. People from all around the village would always have different stories of these duendes. Sometimes they would get up on horses when someone was riding them, and even at night you could hear them on your roof. You could hear them laughing. I don't remember my grandmother telling me if they had names or anything. They just referred to them as duendes. So like gnomes, little people. When I asked what happened to them and where they are now, they told me that after some years, and after the world started to change more, they then just stopped appearing to them. I will first tell you the story that they told me, then I will describe and talk about this thing. So basically, a relative of my grandmother that also lived near the ranch was walking next to a river at dawn because he was going fishing. As he was walking down the river, he sees a woman in the distance on the other side of the river. He describes her as a beautiful woman with a perfect body, in a white dress and long black hair, but he could only see the back of her. As he got closer, he thought that it was someone that he knew, so he started shouting to say hello and called her out by name, but she was not responding. When he got closer and closer, she finally turned around, and when she did, he saw that her face was actually a human skull. This guy screamed and was so scared that he fainted and was later found unconscious. He was taken to a hospital and was treated, but for many weeks he had fevers and he was always scared. This thing had broken this man just by looking at him. And as the years passed, more and more people had experienced such things with this woman, or as my family calls them, tepas. Some other people that lived around the ranch sometimes saw them walking upstream, sometimes in pairs. So the people believed they also lived more inland, like the gnomes, like the duendes. After I heard this story, I found an article that described the same thing that my family told me. Here it is. Hello everyone, this is editor Yvonne. If you want to see this link to this Wikipedia, it is down below in the description. Back to the story. But as you can see, it has different names. These are some of the stories that I've been told, and if I'm being honest, I don't know if I believe them or not. Personally, I never experienced or met any of these creatures, but I find it odd that other cultures and people around the world describe these creatures the same way, even though they did not have ways to communicate what they were seeing all around the world. Also, when my great-grandmother and grandmother told me these stories, I could tell from their eyes and the way they spoke that they weren't lying, or at least they fully believed that they had seen them and that these creatures were real. So I want to start off by saying that I'm a very skeptical guy. I became an atheist when I was 17, and that's when my belief in God dissipated. The belief in everything supernatural went out the window as well. I also wanted to say that I've lived in Appalachia for all but 4 years of my life. I'm 22 now, and I've never experienced any of the creepy things people say about the Appalachian Mountains. Until the story I'm about to tell you. So towards the end of last year, 2023, me and my two friends had simultaneous quarter-life crises, sort of, which eventually led us to getting rid of almost all of our belongings, quitting our jobs, leaving our apartments, living out of our cars, and door dashing all around the country. Well, on our first night on our big trip, we went to stay with a friend of one of my travel mates. She lived in Tennessee in the Appalachian Mountains, the Smoky Mountains specifically, which, for those who don't know, is like a subcategory of the Appalachians. She lived off a back road in the middle of the woods. The first night we were there, she had told us that there were strange occurrences on the property. The house was haunted and there was something in the woods. She had told us that whatever is in the woods, it likes to hang out around her shed. She was walking up onto her porch when she got the overwhelming feeling of being watched. Being fed up with whatever it was, she screamed something along the lines of, "Get the fuck away," into the woods, and only for something to scream right back at her. She claimed to have seen it one night from her kitchen window. She said it was like peeking around the shed, staring at her. It wasn't an animal, but it wasn't human either. Out of curiosity, I asked her to describe whatever creature she saw in more detail, but she refused, and I, being the skeptic that I am, basically disregarded everything she said and forgot all about it. Now, because it was our first night on the trip, it was so much fun for us and new to us. We wanted to sleep in our cars, which were parked right in front of the shed that I mentioned earlier. Yeah, that shed. We hadn't yet made window covers, so we were sleeping in 3 SUVs with uncovered windows completely surrounding us. But I had no issue with this. I thought the worst that could happen was that I'd wake up with a bear staring at me. So I went to bed peacefully and woke up in the middle of the night, really needing to pee. I got half dressed, put my shoes on, left my car, and walked to the edge of the woods, did my business, and got back in my car and went to sleep. I had not a care in the world, no uneasy feeling, no feeling of being watched, nothing. The next night, I once again woke up, really needing to pee. So just as I did the last night before, I sat up in my bed, put on my pants, got my shoes ready, and reached for the door handle, but I couldn't do it. It was like every hair on my body stood up on end, and I got this overwhelming feeling of dread and foreboding. Now, I had a makeshift bed in the back of my SUV on top of all the back seats that I flipped down, so I'm sitting there in my bed, looking around through all of the uncovered windows. I couldn't see anything outside, except for some faint outlines of trees and the glints off in my travel mates' cars. I neither saw nor heard anything that should be putting me on edge. I reached for the door handle again, but I once again got that terrible feeling. I continued to look around and try to reach for the door, but I kept withdrawing my hand. I finally gave up and said, "Screw it, I'm just gonna pee in an empty water bottle." The next morning, I got up and I was talking to my travel mates, and one of them mentioned waking up in the middle of the night, out of nowhere, experiencing an overwhelming sense of being watched. She sat up in her makeshift bed and looked all around, only to see nothing. I can't lie, when she said that, I got a bit of a knot in my stomach. I asked her what time it was when it happened, and she estimated it was around the same time I woke up, around 3 a.m. I then told both of them about my experience, and we were all a little freaked out about it. When we were heading out to our cars the following night, we noticed that all the homeowners' 5+ outdoor cats were all sitting on our front porch, which we hadn't seen the last 2 nights. Previously, they had all been scattered around the property, if they were even in sight. We thought it was weird, but we didn't really think much of it. We all climbed into our cars and said our goodnights on our walkie-talkies. It was a pretty warm and muggy night for October, so so we all got our battery-powered fans running. One of my friends frustratingly reported that her walkie-talkie was dying. Then my other friend reported that their fan had died. Then my walkie-talkie started dying. And it continued until, in the span of 5 minutes, all of our electronic camping gear, walkie-talkies, flashlights, and fans had all died. Finding this incredibly creepy, we all decided that we should just sleep in the house to be better safe than sorry. We were gathering all of our things to move inside when I began to hear what sounded like something large walking through the leaves in the woods. I kept stopping what I was doing and looked towards my friends, who were standing right by the forest. They seemed unbothered every time, so I would just continue what I was doing. That was when I heard a louder noise coming from the woods and finally decided to walk over to my friends. Turns out, one of them was standing watch while the other one gathered the rest of the things. Me and my friend stood there watching my friend's back, and it kept sounding like whatever was in the woods kept getting closer to us. Soon enough, my friend had gathered all of her things, and we calmly but quickly went into the house. From what I can remember, I slept in the house the following night as well, and the night after that, one of my friends borrowed some sage from the homeowner and saged all along the wood line and around our vehicles before we got ready for bed. We slept perfectly fine for that night, and each night after that. No more weird feelings, noises, nothing. Of course, we were pretty much perpetually on edge from then on, but it was never quite the same feeling of dread and foreboding that I had felt before. To be honest, I don't know what to make of all of it. I know I didn't see anything, but the feeling I got was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. That was the first and only time in my life where I'd gotten that feeling, especially just out of nowhere. I've told the story a few times now, and I've had people tell me it was just a bear, but I don't think a bear would give me that sort of instinctual fear of danger when I can't even hear or see it. And I'm fully aware that I may be biased now, but I've lended a bit more credibility to the homeowner's stories after my experience. For those of you who are curious, no, we are not still on the trip. Unfortunately, the whole thing went downhill after a couple months, and we are now integrated back into society. We are, however, all still friends, and no, we didn't experience anything like this again, despite staying at several campgrounds in the middle of the woods in other parts of the southeast. Well, I saw this place and I have something that still haunts me to this day. Sadly, a kid I told this story to took it as his own and butchered it on 4chan with a lot of inconsistencies. Needless to say, I snapped at the lad as I take this real story of mine seriously, cause it was the first night that I was shown that I'm easy prey. So a bit of lore leading up to the situation. In 2016, I was living in Denver, Colorado. I was in high school at the time, and I had a good, decent job that was paying me well, but fired me for being a metal techno music blaster as I did the job. Me and my family moved due to my dear old dad getting into it with a landlord, resulting in, well, I can't say because it would violate the first rule of this subreddit. We moved a few months later to a city in southern Colorado because rent was cheap there and still is. I'm a bit of a horror and paranormal lover, so naturally stuff like skinwalkers and werewolves draw me in. Something about it just spoke to me to check it out, and being a horror nerd, it was a good time hearing and reading such stories, even ones that are true. But no one really realizes how horrifying things can get when you're met with the real thing. It's unclear to me if these are evil shaman or spirits, but I can tell you, a warm night in 2021 was a night that put things into perspective on why you should never want something like that to show up. With that, we have a bit of my history leading up to my encounter in my own home. The night was like any other. I just got home from a new job, I cleaned the call center and relaxed with some Destiny 2 with my friends in one ear and listening to a Navajo shaman talk about skinwalkers and their history in the other. Needless to say, it got very dark to me. After a few hours, I called it quits on Destiny 2 with the lads, as we were doing Vanguard Nightfall missions that night to get a very heavy ammo using a grenade launcher. We succeeded in getting some good rolls, but alas, we aren't here to talk about Destiny. So after about 3 hours of going to bed, I was woken up by a pair of glowing red eyes just watching me. I couldn't move. My body was locked in as if it was screaming at me, "Don't move. Don't move or you're dead." Now, this is where things take a turn. I was still living with my family when this all happened, so you can bet not only was I scared and unable to move, I was scared what he was going to do to my mother, my younger brother, and my sick father. I could feel and hear my own heartbeat beating, slowing down. Then, the growling came. It started getting close to my bed, growling, and on occasion snarling. It was pitch black in the room, and all I could see was those eyes, those blood-red, angry eyes that tell you, the world you know it, it has ended. What happens now is my choice. It felt like an eternity, but I backed off and I could move again. But I didn't want to. Why? It was still there, staring at me, growling as if testing me or seeing what I was going to do so it can do what it really wanted to do to me. I never took my eyes off of its eyes, not even once to shut my eyes and wish for it to go away. But in the words of Mr. Quaint, sometimes it doesn't go away. I was thinking, scared, that it had to be a nightmare. It had to be at any moment I would wake up to my bedroom light on and my younger brother slapping me to wake me from it. But it wasn't. I didn't get such a mercy. After a long time, the sun decided to rise and the eyes disappeared without a trace. Not taking any chances, I grabbed my handgun and did a sweep of the house. Mom was terrified, and my dad laying there asking me what the hell sounded like a warped chainsaw. But my brother, he saw it, and he wished he hadn't given me a description. I remember his words to a damn T. It looked like some skinny, tall person with a wolf's head, and it stared at me for a bit. The teeth looked like a bunch of knives, and the hands like humans and the hands like a human, but with Freddy Krueger claws going on. I don't know what the hell that was, but I don't ever want to see it again. Dad went into a yelling fit, blaming me for giving them all nightmares, playing some horror flick while I went to bed, and that's what he chalked it up to be, but I had never done that. Hours later, Mom took me for a drive and parked at the city park, asking me, "What the hell was that last night?" I told her I don't know, but whatever the hell that was, it was not friendly. Not in the slightest. The following weeks, bad luck happened. My runs in Destiny 2 went to hell. My jaw was on my butt, saying I never cleaned and missed a lot of spots, when I never did miss a spot, to the point that where I told him to shove it, and I quit during that time. The employees of the call center gave me their support for me, and I thanked them for that, and they said that there was no problems at all. Everything was clean to the point that if they would even eat off the break room floor or the bathroom floor if they wanted to. So they just didn't understand why my boss was losing his mind at me. So I went to a shaman out in the rural parts of the city and told him what happened. What he said next was, "You drew to you with your interest. It took interest in you not because of your negative energy as a buffet, even though you try to be nice and polite. You must have some native blood in your family tree. It's still out there, watching you. I don't know if it's an evil spirit or a skinwalker, but I'll tell you what. I'll get a priest friend of mine and bless your house as soon as possible for free. It will keep it away as long as you do not feed it or attract it any further. I still paid the shaman, and I donated to his priest friend's church. 2 days later, Dad's health went to hell so bad that it was time for a hospice. 3 days later, Dad called and had me and my mom and my brother come to see him one last time. We said our goodbyes, but made Mom and my brother leave while I stayed behind to have one last conversation. I saw it in my window last night, son. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything I've done to you and the hell I've put you and your brother and your mother through. I'm so sorry. I thought it was a horror movie that you were blaring that night. I know you must hate me, and you have every right to do so. So you can tell me off, yell, scream, and curse at me. I've made my peace with God. But know this. It's still out there. It's waiting for you. Take care of your mother and your brother. Keep that thing far away from them. I know you will do the right thing. Those are the last words he spoke before he died right in front of me. And I said out loud, the dead have settled their debts, and it's time for the living to pick up the tab. I'll do my best, and that thing will never get near them as long as I draw breath. Rest in peace, Dad. May you find more peace in the afterlife than you did in life. My father and I had a rocky relationship when I turned into a teen around 2016. I stopped acting like him and became a better person. My dad was a jerk with delusions of wealth and grandeur. I always butted heads with him, but how he treated people in the house and in public, and even traded punches with them on some occasions. But now, we come to 2024. I told a kid this story in a Discord voice chat, and, well, I find a post on 4chan days later where he screwed it up with timetables and inconsistent times and dates and months, and he even made a follow-up post. Yet again, he screwed it all up, saying, I had a gun at the front door and it was smashed in till the sun came up. None of that happened, except me doing a sweep of the house with the gun in my hand. All doors were undamaged. What really pissed me off was that my dad passed away around that time, and that thing came into my house to show that it could easily get to me and my family if it so chose to kill us all. We moved from that house into an apartment due to hard times, and yes, I'm still living in that same city, but whenever I recount, remember, or speak of this incident, I feel watched. Even a border collie I adopted named Emmy growls at a closet or the front door at night. It's out there, and it's waiting for its moment. And I'll be waiting right now for it, now that I have a sense of what I might be up against. I'm more than happy to talk or have someone share a similar experience, but I know that I'll never say the name Skinwalker in a voice chat or anywhere out loud, because from what I've learned, it's like inviting a vampire into your home. You don't want that. Thank you for reading this. It has also allowed me to clear the air, thanks to that kid, but this is a moment of my life I will never forget. It seems it will follow me to the grave, but I will never forget that there are forces in this world we will never understand, but never paint a target on your back, 'cause then they will come for you. The night at a ranch called La Bendición, located in the Mihuatlan de Porfirio Diaz, was more intense than I could have ever imagined. We had been assigned the mission to secure the event area after the annual community fair held there, as part of the 8th Brigade of the Oaxacan Military Police. My small detachment, composed of 2 comrades and myself, were ready to fulfill our assigned duty. After making sure the event was over and the civilians had left, we settled with difficulty in front of our military tactical vehicles. The fatigue of the day was settling in, and we hoped for a quiet night before returning to Oaxaca at dawn. Despite our expectations, the tranquility of the night was interrupted when my companions began to narrate horror stories. However, the accumulated fatigue was stronger than I was, and only a couple minutes into the stories, I fell into a deep sleep. I felt that only 15 minutes had passed in my dreams when I was rudely awakened by one of my companions, who urged me to look forward. As I did so, I noticed reflective eyes staring back at us, illuminated by the lights on our vehicles. Surprise gripped us all as we observed what at first glance appeared to be a rabbit. The oddity of the situation lay in the fact that in that area, it was extremely unusual to encounter rabbits. At least that's what we knew until that moment. Laughing and joking, my companions began to speculate that we might be looking at a nahual. However, I, confident and convinced that it was only a rabbit of extraordinary dimensions, prepared to get out of the vehicle with the intention of attending to my physiological needs, since the surprise had stimulated my bladder. I was about to get out of the car when my partner suddenly grabbed me by the shirt and forced me to close the door immediately. He pointed out insistingly towards the rabbit. When we looked back, we were met with something that took everyone's breath away. The eyes that previously appeared to belong to a rabbit underwent a startling transformation. They then glowed a shade of red and orange, and its initial modest size began to change in a way I had never witnessed before in my life. I'd never seen a creature capable of such a metamorphosis. It took a form of a strange amalgamation with partly human features and a musculature reminiscent of our own, but distinguished by having a tail, an elongated snout, and apparently no hair. The speed at which events unfolded left me so stunned that I came to question whether I was still asleep, and whether if it was just a figment of my imagination. However, the perplexed expressions on the faces of my companions belied that possibility. The situation was as real to them as it was to me. The creature moved swiftly, scaling the trunks until it disappeared into the branches of the trees, beginning an unsettling tour into the truck from the heights. Despite our military training, a sense of dread enveloped us. The creature's agility was astonishing, giving us the impression that it was stalking us. At certain moments, it lunged onto the truck with unusual force, moving it in a way that no other creature could accomplish, much less a rabbit. The night became unbearable, as the creature continued to claw at the bodywork of the truck from time to time and kept permanently circling us. The night was extremely distressing and exhausting. The darkness, mixed with the uncertainty of not knowing where the creature was at any given moment, kept us on edge. The dawn greeted us with relief. Under the first rays of sunlight, we made the decision to retreat. As we were leaving the ranch, we met the owner, who was arriving at that very moment. I was confused. I thought the owner had spent the night at the ranch house and not letting on. I rolled down the window of the truck to discuss it with him. However, his reaction was not what I expected. He responded with a nervous laugh and proceeded to tell us that it turns out the owner no longer resides on the farm, but in Santa Catrina, Huixla, a nearby town. He revealed to us that he had moved away, leaving the finca only for occasional events due to something that constantly haunted the property while he lived there. He had gone through terrifying experiences inside his own home, and like us in our trucks, had felt the haunting presence of something wandering in the shadows of La Bendición. With this confirmation, we decided to put some distance between us and return to Oaxaca as soon as possible. On the way back, we shared reflections on what we might have witnessed. The only answer that resonated in my mind was that of a Nahual, as the creature resembled the legends narrated on social media, and its presence seemed more real than we could have ever imagined. I had some more weird shit happen to me last night. I took my 2 dogs for a walk. I normally walk Finn, a large all-black German Shepherd, towards the park where I had all these experiences. And I walk my other dog, Booger, a Cheat Terrier mix, the other direction towards downtown. On my walk with Finn, about a block away in the direction I was headed, I saw 3 or 4 deer calmly walking towards the park. Most nights where something weird happens to me starts like this. The deer seemed completely unbothered by me as I approached. They kept walking towards the park but stopped every few steps to look back at me, as if they wanted me to follow them. Then, as Finn and I reached to where the deer were, I noticed about 10 or more other deer waiting as well. Then they all started walking together, calmly, but still looking back at me every few feet. And on my way towards the park, I smelled the stench of rotting meat. I know the smell very well, as I used to be a butcher. It's very strong, very pungent, like someone plugged my nostrils with rotting ground meat or something. At the same time I smell the stench, I get the chills. Finn's hair stand up and he gets more nervous, and I could feel the air around me get colder. As I continue walking, I look down an alleyway that cuts the block in half, and if you would walk down the dark alley, you would spot where I eventually walk back home. I was 2 blocks away from the park. When you reach the park, you can walk down the same road and you can continue towards the park, or you can continue to the road which turns left. Looking down that alleyway, you are looking at the part of the road that continues left, which is the way I take every night on my way back. What I saw, I tried to convince myself wasn't real, or maybe I just saw something else and my brain tried to convince me it was this. A large, muscular, pale, hairless creature that was moving so fast I could barely see it. I saw the motion down the alley about 2 blocks away. The exit on the alley on that side has a street light above it. It wasn't moving still. It was moving, and it was moving really fast. The only reason I'm positive what I saw wasn't a deer or something normal is because of something I saw later that night that I will write about when I talk about my walk with my other dog, Booger. It solidified what I saw was something I was not supposed to see. In the meantime, I convinced myself I was making stuff up and being a wuss. As I move into the tree line of the park, the large group of deer move into the side of the street where the neighborhood is, while I'm on the other side with the tree line. I noticed something in the clearing though. A lone deer, separate from the large group across the street, staring directly at me. I have a flashlight pointed at him, and I even hung up my call with my wife to use my phone to take video of this moment. This lone deer didn't even have micro movements from breathing. The other deer around the street were constantly readjusting, and you might be thinking to yourself, oh yeah, deer do that with bright lights shining at them. Deers and headlights always act that way. Just wait. Finn starts to pull very hard and acts anxious, nearly knocking me over. I turn to look at this street towards the large group of deer for about 3 seconds, before quickly turning around to face the lone deer again. In those 3 seconds, that lone deer was easily 30 feet closer to me. still not moving, staring directly at me. At this moment, I have this on video. I have pictures. I felt weird. I felt unsafe. I've lived in rural Iowa my entire life, and I've always lived outdoors. This didn't feel normal. I was scared. I back away while shining my light at the deer, and once I get a block away or so, he finally turns around and calmly walks into the tree line. The whole way home, I feel like I'm being stalked, not just watched, but like something is following me. Now I went back home and I sat there for a bit and I just tried to talk to myself into believing that it was all a coincidence, you know? And after nearly 20 minutes, I started to walk my other dog, Booger, my smaller Chi mix. The entire walk was nice and very enjoyable, actually. I had my other earbuds in and I was talking to my wife about what I saw in a joking way. Man, I was such a wuss. I really scared myself for no reason. I said, at the end of the walk, I turned to go down the same alleyway as I leave from the garage for our walks. I stopped speaking from what I saw at the opposite end of the alley. My wife heard me stop, and I want to preface this by saying that I didn't have any substances, including alcohol, for weeks up to that point. The most I've done in that department is a few beers, or I'll use weed to ease the anxiety of life is getting hard. I have no mental conditions that will cause me to hallucinate. The most I have is a personality disorder, resulting from trauma that I have been overcoming quickly this past year. I saw in that alley 2 large, muscular, pale, hairless creatures walking like apes at the end of the alley. The same thing I saw when I was with my other dog, Finn. This time, not going fast though, much closer, and it also felt intentional. I saw them walking across the street very slowly, staring directly at me. These were not deer. They didn't have faces like deer. They didn't have fur. They didn't have tails. They didn't even walk like deer. They weren't slender like deer. My first thought was honestly that I am looking at 2 hairless male lions in the middle of Iowa. I stood there paralyzed in fear, and they just left my sight. 15 seconds later, I finally get the courage to walk the few feet into the garage. When I take my first step, I see a third one, slowly meandering across the street, staring at me. My dog, Booger, noticed him as well and started growling. I ran to the door and just watched the garage shut all the way the entire night. Finn guarded the bedroom door. He never does that. He sat staring at the door all night. My other dog, Booger, stared at the window all night. He never does that either. This happened to me yesterday night, Monday, May 13th, 2024. I don't know what to think about what I saw. Hello, community. It is hard for me to write this because it is something that to this day impacts me a lot. Well, here it goes. This happened in 2013 during Holy Week. Every Easter week, we stayed in my grandfather's ranch, which is a few minutes from Ures, a town in Sonora, Mexico. I remember that this ranch was large with corrals for cows, pigs, horses, and so much more. My grandfather lived near the pig pen, in a little house with the pigs. You see, he lived in a little blue wooden house, and he barely had any light from a lamp outside his house, where he used to sit on a very old wooden chair that squeaked when he sat on it. Well, on that day, We were outside about 30 meters from his house with my family talking around a bonfire that my uncle and I made. We were talking and it went on till around 12 o'clock at night. And in the mountains, everything gets dark quickly. When we're in the middle of a conversation with my grandfather, telling his horror stories and all that, my nephew felt like going to the bathroom, which was inside at the house at the time. It was dark that night, and he didn't really arrive when he almost reached my grandfather's house. And he started screaming one time, saying, "He's sitting, he's sitting." My uncle, my grandfather, and I went running to him. When we arrived at my nephew, there he was. But there was also my grandfather's donkey, sitting in a chair, humming a song. He saw us and started laughing in a voice so distorted, and it still gives me chills to this day when I remember it. After he finished laughing, he ran towards us on two legs. None of us noticed until my uncle said that it had a pig's head on top of its head, and we started to run. We could hear that thing running towards us, laughing. When we arrived with everyone, they saw us looking pale, and we were at a loss for words. We told them that a horse had ran at us and we had already put it in the corral, but to this day, we decided that we would never tell them. And after many years, my grandfather sold the ranch, and we never heard anything about it again. I write this anecdote because I know you will believe me. I'm going to tell you what happened to my aunt here in Culiacan. It turns out that 30 years ago, when my aunt just got married, she bought a house, but that house was next to a cemetery. She never imagined what was going to happen to her there. My aunt had 9 sisters, including my mother, and since the house was big, 2 other aunts lived with her. That house was close to my grandmother's house, so she would almost always have a lot of people, or sometimes she was left alone. One night, she stayed with another aunt. One night, one of the aunts stayed with another aunt. Then, almost at bedtime, she started to hear a lot of footsteps and people walking and talking as if they were at a party downstairs. She didn't get scared, but she thought that everyone had arrived early from the party. When she went downstairs to attend to the people, she realized that no one was there. She was genuinely shocked, but she didn't get scared, so she just went up to bed. Another time at midnight, she heard a knock at the door of the house. She asked my other aunt to go with her because it was late. So, they opened the door, and there was nobody. The street was empty. They got a little scared and went to bed. The next day in the morning, they did not tell anyone because it could have just been a joke or some drunk knocking on the door. It was nothing paranormal, and on the same day, one of my aunts left and left my aunt at the house, the owner of the house, alone. She started to wash the dishes and finished. She started to mop the living room floor when she began to hear that the spoons and forks began to move by themselves. She turned to see the kitchen and all the dishes began to shake. She got scared and went up to her room and stayed there for a while. Later, still no one had come home because they were still probably drunk at a party, and she began to go to the patio to wash clothes. It was one of those big patios with a tree in the back, and right next door was the cemetery. She started to wash by hand the clothes, and suddenly she heard something behind her. In the direction where the tree was, a woman spoke to her and said,
Rosa, turn around. Rosa, turn around. Rosa.
When my aunt heard this, she was petrified with fright, because she knew that there was no one in the house, and it was a spectral voice of sorts, and without turning around, she went to her room to hide. At around 5 o'clock in the afternoon, everyone arrived at the house, and they were surprised to see my aunt upstairs in her room. She tells them everything. And my other relatives, when they hear this, they say that something like this has happened to everyone. Nothing like that, but things would move around without explanation, but no one ever dared to tell her. My aunt lived for months in that house and eventually sold it. A short time later, she found that the owners had torn down the house to build something new. And when they knocked down the tree, they discovered a wooden box full of golden coins. Not enough to get rich, but several. And she believed that the spirits wanted to give her the box, and that is why they talked to her, but she never dared to turn around. When my grandfather was newly wedded, he worked in a very well-known hotel in those days. The hotel was very large. However, the people who came to experience strange encounters there were almost always from the same place in the hotel. The people who stayed in the specific room almost always never lasted more than 2 days, since the receptionist said that many times they would receive calls from annoyed people who claimed that there was a child in their window that always tapped on the glass so that they would go out to play. However, the people who stayed there might not want to remember or want an explanation for that event, since it was on the 5th floor and the rooms didn't have any balconies in that area of the hotel. The cleaning people who worked there didn't want to go through that hallway also, since it was said that the child played in the middle of the hallway and you can hear his voice and laughter. My grandfather witnessed one of these events personally when he went down the hallway and heard the voice of a little boy behind him. But when he turned around, he never saw anyone. From another anecdote from that hotel was not told by my grandfather, but by a friend of his. The gentleman, we'll call him Miguel, was a guard of one of those booths that allow access to employees in the morning shift. One day when he arrived, he met the new guard. She made small talk, according to him. The girl was very talkative. Between that talk came a question that was very strange to Miguel, and the question was, until what time can I allow the entry of the cleaning employees? The girl began to tell him that the night before, an elderly lady arrived, and immediately the girl did not let her in. The lady, when she saw that, showed her credentials to enter. Her name was Maria. And then she let her in, but didn't see her leave. Upon hearing this information, he could not help but get serious and then said, "This can't be possible. Miss Maria passed away 2 days ago." The girl, thinking it was a joke, just laughed uncomfortably. And upon seeing Miguel's expression, she understood everything. She just kept quiet and left. And after that day, she didn't show up for work. Well, I will tell you about my father's story. To sum it all up, I don't know who did the witchcraft, but there are suspicions about who it was. My dad worked his business of sorts in farms. He had the same butler since he bought his first farm. If I remember, it was around 2004, 2005. Everything was going well, but then the butler was fired. And that same year, he was fired from his corporate job. He's had a lot of financial difficulties since he fired that man. The interesting thing is that after all the dismissal, my dad was diagnosed with a malignant cancerous tumor. He had several projects to get ahead which all failed. He lost his parents, his grandparents. He had serious problems with my mom. He suffered several car accidents. To sum it all up, I ended up talking to him and suggested that he move to the farm because he built a house there for the family and he was in another apartment in a project where he was losing money. And I simply told him to take care of his main farm because it was useless for him to be in another place and not be there where it could be more convenient for him. My dad moved to the farm, and while on the farm in the bottom part of the house, the pool and the surrounding area were infested with toads, and they found a lot of pests. On the farm is a house where the butler lives too, so one day they were doing something in that house and found a dummy with one foot facing forward and the other backwards. My dad's dog wouldn't go near the doll. They tried to burn the doll, and it wouldn't burn until a pastor came to anoint the houses and to get the doll burned. About a month later, my father was free of cancer. We were in a better economic situation. His relationship with my mother was very nice and getting better. His personality has changed a lot for the better. The house was no longer infested with any plague or any toads. He has had many projects in which little by little he's getting ahead. And while there was a 180-degree turn with everything that was happening in his life, I don't know much about witchcraft, but after that, my belief in it has become concrete. These are the stories told to me by two of my best friends of 20 years. I'm going to preface this by saying these two are some of the most honest people I've ever known. And it took them years before they'd speak out to me about this stuff. Once I was able to convince them to tell me about this, the older of the two brothers broke down into tears, abruptly left about halfway through the first story. It's just too traumatic for him to relive. I feel bad for that, and I haven't asked him to speak about it since that day. His younger brother that I'm closer with provided the detail, as well as their cousin who carried a religious title that's essentially an enforcement position designated to deal with the presence of skinwalkers and related threats. This is going to be a really long post, so buckle up. I was told that the Zuni's are a little bit different compared to other reservations in New Mexico, specifically because when the US government sanctioned land to all the native tribes, the Zuni's didn't work with the government. Everybody who traveled through New Mexico knows there's a casino on almost every reservation. The Zuni's do not have a casino because they refuse to work with the government and especially refuse to provide information about their heritage and the land they lived on. My buddy told me the tribal elders taught him that the Zuni's are in that specific area because they're protecting secrets of the land. I'm going to add in a couple details that pertain to the story, and I'll expand on that later. Apparently my friend, the younger brother that I mentioned before, was born with a split tongue, like a lizard, and splits on his pupils instead of being round. And you're probably making the same face I made when I was first told that. But keep in mind, all of this is religious to the Zuni's. They're very serious about all of it. They do not allow non-tribal members to know this knowledge, nor do they allow the presence of non-Zuni's. You can visit if invited, but would not be allowed to stay during certain times. I'll start with the first story they shared when we were about 13 years old. And this is the first experience of many that is too much for my friend to relive. He said he was very young and he woke up abruptly in the night to glass breaking. When he opened his eyes, his dad was already in his room and motioned to him to stay where he was and to be quiet while pointing a large revolver towards the kitchen where the window was broken. Not long after, his dad fired multiple shots. He then heard a screech so loud it hurt his ears along with the scuffle in the next room, and saw a shadow on the wall, did not look nor move anything like a person. Apparently, whatever was in the house immediately leapt out the same window that was broken into. And he said the adults gathered and left to find it shortly after, but was never told what they found, just that it was definitely a skinwalker. The day after he broke down into tears talking about it, I went and saw him, and I was apologizing. Surprisingly, he said the shadows and the screeching he saw scarred him, and is ultimately why he had left the reservation. I never asked him about it again. Another instance that the older brother told me was one that left me particularly intrigued, though I'm not sure why compared to some of the other stories. He said they were having some type of celebratory feast one night, and my friend saw what he described as a very small person stealing their food while the adults weren't looking. He said it was about 1 to 2 feet tall, and when he saw it, he immediately shouted to his dad and all the adults. And when he saw it, he immediately shouted to his dad, and all of the adults dropped what they were doing and immediately started chasing it, trying to corner it. This went on for a while, and during the commotion, they realized there were multiple tiny beings, one of which was able to escape into the gutters. He said he remembers everyone trying to reach into the gutters and block them from getting away, but one got away, but one was caught, and he distinctly remembers his uncle holding it up high by the leg and watch it scream out in terror. It sounded like a tiny human, and then they immediately tied it up, stuffed him into a cloth pouch, and burned him alive over a fire. He said the way it screamed while burning terrified him, because he could hear how much pain it was in, but they were human-like. And by the way he explained them to me, they seemed like something that seems like a lawn gnome. He doesn't know if they're necessarily evil, but they kill every single one they come across. Not sure why, but that's the one that really creeps me out. The next one I remember, the two brothers were together somewhere out in the wilderness hunting rabbits just outside the reservation. They were walking home because the sun had just went down, but came across a barely standing shack. Being dumb kids with a pellet gun, they went inside, and shortly after, a rock hit the wall of the shack. So they immediately go outside, and within seconds notice commotion in the vegetation about 30 feet away. They had one flashlight, so they pointed towards the movement, and a human-looking figure stood up, faced them with its head tilted to the side, and described it as a very, very pale person with facial features that were not human. He said, "I don't know how to explain it, man. It just doesn't look like a person." So upon seeing that, they immediately took off running back home, and as soon as they could, they see coyotes just sitting alongside the trail, sitting off to the side, but all of them were just staring at them with no fear of their presence and followed them all the way back. They said that they were told by the elders they were being warned off, and the commotion in the grass was a skinwalker changing shape. They said they never went back to that area again. And the younger brother said he'd never been so terrified. And I'm glad the younger brother told me about that story instead of his younger brother. The younger brother still today is able to better deal with the harsh realities. He told me that he and his friends would play around this mountain and knew where the entrance to a cave was. They tried to get into the cave, but not far into the entrance, it got too small for him to fit, and even his 10-year-old torso couldn't squeeze through the narrow opening. He said that they were off to the side of the entrance, hiding from another friend walking towards them, and noticed something moving very, very fast, going in and out of the cave entrance. He and his friends said that they went back every day for a week and would watch them for hours, but couldn't ever see what exactly they were, but were astounded by the speed they moved at, but didn't understand how they were getting in and out of the cave entrance as if they were bigger than him. He was forbidden from ever going back after the adults found out what he and his friends were up to. And as for their cousin, that carries the title going to those who are there to deal with skinwalkers. I ended up getting pretty close to him too, since his cousins were like family to me, and I picked his brain one night, and he said they considered them a manifestation of pure evil. They're ruthless, and they know they're not supposed to be around the Zuni people, and they're fully aware of their actions. If they find a skinwalker is near, they immediately hunt it down, catch it, string it up upside down over a fire, and burn it alive till there's nothing left, bones and all. During that process, he said the sounds they make is like nothing you'd ever hear anywhere else. He said you don't kill them with bullets. There's different levels to their abilities. They can affect you in a variety of ways, but always in a negative fashion, such as leaving you sick or dead. If I remember correctly, there's a time every year where everyone but him and others with their titles stay inside and lock the doors and block the windows. And then he will then walk the town in specific clothing, chanting specific words, then hunt skinwalkers with his peers. I didn't really understand, but it is implied that skinwalkers are expected to be present around that time. But he spoke about it like it's something completely normal. I think it's like a holiday, and during this week or so there's a period where the skinwalkers arrive, and that's the main reason they designated them enforcers that are trained to deal with them, and apparently never look at skinwalkers in the eyes. One last story I have that I'm going to share with you is not from the Zuni reservation. This is a story my uncle told me and takes place in the reservation outside Bernalino, a small city which is about 20 minutes away from Albuquerque, but I don't remember the name of the reservation. So my uncle was a sniper in the Air Force and saw combat in Panama. After leaving the military, he had a firearm instructor for the APD, the Albuquerque Police Department, and then for Bernalillo Police Department. One day he gets a call from a drunk guy acting strange at the base of a mountain. So he shows up, but doesn't see anyone there. So he gets out and starts looking around, and at the base of the mountain, he sees clothes neatly folded. He turns around and he's surprised by what he calls the biggest wolf he's ever seen in his life. About 20 feet away, walking straight towards him. He said it was around 5 feet tall and staring right in his eyes. So he immediately put his hand to his holstered gun, but didn't draw, and starts walking backwards towards his car, while the wolf continues towards him. Once he reaches his unit, he gets inside as fast as possible, and when he shuts the door, he's now an inch away from his window. He said he had to look up at it while seated in this unit. He then makes a sorry I'm leaving gesture and drove down the road where he met one of the reservation officers. She asked him what happened since he was pale and visibly shaken. All he could muster was, "I don't know, it's massive. I don't think I belong here. I didn't." She immediately put her hand up and said, "Don't worry about it. I got it. I've been wondering when this would all happen again. Go ahead and get out of here." Then she drove off, and she didn't go into the area but rather parked her car sideways, blocking the entrance to that area, and started making calls. He said, by the way, that the thing was looking directly into his eyes. Not to mention the absurd size and the aggression and lack of fear, and also the folded clothes, that he knew he was face to face with a skinwalker, and he hoped he never come across something like that again. To end this, I'll talk about what the younger brother told me and shown me about his heritage. One day he took out a box and showed me the contents, saying that his father had given it to him and had been passed down from father to son for over 1,000 years. Inside was a couple of different dry plants and various things, but most notably a rock, carved by hand, of a reptile-like humanoid. It looked like a person but with armored scales and a face with a protruding mouth and large teeth. I don't want anyone to think I'm a conspiracy theorist, because I'm not. But this thing looks exactly like what I've heard explained about reptilian aliens would look like. We were both amazed, as he never really thought twice about what that could mean. Around this time, we were getting stoned, entertaining ourselves with aliens and laughing about conspiracy theories. Keep in mind, this is a guy who was born with a split tongue and splits in his eyes. The mother confirmed that to me as well. He went on to tell me the Zuni's are protecting the secrets of the land, and the reservation doesn't have a casino because they refused to sell out all their knowledge to the government. He said he was taught that things came out from inside the earth and met with their people thousands of years ago. These beings lived somewhere inside the earth where it's warm, and eventually these reptilian beings came back to live under the surface. I don't remember if they went back into the earth after they had some feud or war, or if it was just because of outsiders arriving, but after that, they met the ancient Zuni for a short time and they bred with each other. My buddy is apparently a descendant of those two species mixing, and is why he was born with a split tongue and splits in his pupils. Now, I don't know what connection skinwalkers have to this reptilian species that lives inside the earth, or roasting tiny food thieves and celebrating while they scream through an agonizing death, but I do find it interesting that all of this is associated with native belief. I plan on going over all this with him too, as I'm going off of memory from 20 to 30 years ago. The younger brother is my closest friend, so if anyone has questions, I'll do my best. Or if there's something you'd like me to ask him, I can do that as well. My sister once told me that when I came across something paranormal, I would probably not notice it. A couple times, weird things have happened to me, and at first you think that nothing strange is going on. I'm going to tell you the most fucked up thing that has ever happened to me. It was almost 3 years ago, in August of 2021. My mom had very complicated surgery, and we're talking about a 12-hour operating room type of surgery, a team of surgeons, blood transfusions, etc., etc. All that time, I was waiting for news in the waiting room. Shortly after midnight, there was no one in the waiting room. No one was passing in the corridors. I mean, obviously the hospital was illuminated, but it felt strange to see everything so lonely and silent. A social worker spoke to me, and I went to her window, and they asked me to go up to the operating room to talk to one of the surgeons. I went, and they told me that my mother came out of surgery, but she was very weak. She almost died during the surgery, and that she'd probably be sent to intensive care. I went back down to social services to process some things, and in the hallway, something made me turn back. In an empty waiting room, in the middle of nothing really, there was a nun kneeling and praying. I did the paperwork I had to do, and I went back upstairs, but the nun was gone. It had only been around 10 minutes. It really hadn't been that long. I went home, and it was almost around 1 a.m. In the Uber I was taking, that's when I started to think about the illogicality of all this. The nun had to pass in front of me on the way out. She didn't pass by me, but she was gone. The nun also had to pass by the hospital chapel to get to where she was praying. So why pray in the middle of an empty waiting room and not the chapel? And I had never seen a nun in that hospital, and in fact, I'd never seen a nun or any religious person inside of one ever. By the way, Here's the picture that I took.